Good afternoon, sir.
Yo, this is episode 61 of the Beef and Bitcoin podcast with your host, Brett and CH. Today's topics: proof of keys coming up in just about 2 weeks or so. The repo crisis is back in the news, and it looks like we finally figured out who might have been insolvent these days. And student loan bubble is back with a vengeance. And there's some interesting statistics around the student loan bubble and how similar that is to the subprime loan crisis of 2008. So we'll touch on those three. But how you doing this week, man?
I'm doing good. It's another week, and it's like every time the weekend comes, besides obviously for crypto and Bitcoin, which continue to trade the weekends, it's like shit. It's like you're just, I'm always waiting for the next week to start because there's always something going on right now, I feel like, and especially with what we'll talk about later, which is the repo crisis, I would say, because that's what it is. It's gonna get interesting, especially going into this year end, and then obviously being an election year next year. What will happen with our markets?
Right. Yeah. I mean, there's just 2020 is really shaping up to be big, probably bigger than I would have thought. I just kind of thought it would be a non-event year. We'd go into it, but it really looks like there's just so much going on globally that while I'm always way too early with this stuff, and I think things are going to happen quicker than they do, I think 2020 in hindsight there will just be so many blatant signs of just the things to come. So I mean, we're going to talk about it all of next year anyway. So, stay tuned and fucking hit that subscribe button because we'll have a lot more shit to say coming next year. But let's jump right into proof of keys. So this past week, I was listening to, Trace Mayer's making the rounds on the Bitcoin podcast again, and he's really talking about proof of keys. And for those that do not know, proof of keys is an annual event that started last year, or I guess this past year on January 3rd, which is, depending upon who you ask, is Bitcoin's birthday. That's when the Genesis block was mined in 2009 by Satoshi. And it's a celebration of financial sovereignty, right? So since Bitcoin is digital and acts as a bearer instrument, you can claim your keys. You can claim your monetary sovereignty at any time or place. And, you can withdraw your Bitcoins from the exchange. And that's kind of what Trace is talking about. And I think it's interesting that, for a couple of reasons, I think I get why Trace really talks about it. On one hand, Trace is an early investor into Kraken, so he probably has a great understanding of their just reserves and how they manage a fully reserved Bitcoin and cryptocurrency exchange. And I mean, he really pushes for the proof of keys, which is interesting because just this past year, I believe 2 exchanges went down after proof of keys. And the one was Quadriga CX, which is really wacky. And I don't know if you were following this,
I
but
remember that last year.
It was a Canadian exchange. The founder, magically died, and his wife took his body from the morgue back to the hotel in like India or something. I mean, just super sketch city. I mean, clearly this guy made off with a big exit scam.
I didn't know his wife took the body back.
Yeah, I mean, like it's really, really wacky. It's really wacky stuff. But Trace's point, and it's funny because it's an offensive way for him to take out his competitors. Prove that you have the keys. Prove you have the Bitcoin. Withdraw your coins. Use your own full node to validate the transactions. And Quadriga, literally within a few weeks, that was it. It was done. So I have a feeling this will continue. And, I guess this proof of keys event is, it's an annual bank run, essentially, right? That's kind of the best way I've thought to describe it. And annually, Bitcoiners around the globe can withdraw their coins from the exchange all at the same time. And, I know this is interesting because you and I always talk about the current financial system and how
it wouldn't work. If everyone decided to go pull their money out of the bank right now or like on Monday, it would be chaos.
Right. just because you know that they don't have the funds, right? Like that's it. They don't have the funds, and due to the fractional reserve system, that becomes an issue. And it's funny as time continues on, I get less and less. Um, I object less and less to fractional reserve systems. I just think that by having something as these annual bank runs or proof of keys, what you're doing is you're finding the free market. The free market is figuring out how much in reserves you actually need to have. And I think it's just a lot closer to 100% than people give it credit for. And I think because now that this asset is digital in nature, doing an annual bank run every now and then to stress test the system is a very good idea. What do you think about that?
It's not a bad idea. If we did it to our banks, it would be pretty exposing. And to see if your exchange, if like as you were saying, like just having a little bit on exchange and withdrawing, and see if you actually have it, and if obviously if everyone does it, it's a bigger effect.
Yeah, I mean, it can really just show who are the good and the bad actors in the space. You don't want to see too much fractional reserve going on. That's exactly how Mt. Gox went down after they were hacked and had tons of Bitcoin taken from them multiple times throughout their existence, and eventually it caught up to them, and they couldn't give the Bitcoin back to the people who wanted their keys. And I guess when I think about what would happen to our current financial system if that happened, just as you said, it just wouldn't work today. Like you and I know that intuitively. If every single person in whichever country they're in goes and tries to withdraw all of their money from the bank, it's just not going to be there, right?
We covered it with Lebanon not too long ago. That the Lebanese banks were shut down for quite a bit of time. Like it's definitely an issue, and we've seen it before. Like in the early 2010s, and it's crazy I say the early 2010s, like 2011, 2012, with Greece and some of those countries in Europe where they just had huge banking issues. And Italy.
Right. And I get it. If you think about like the covariance of some of this stuff, not everybody is going to need to withdraw their money at the same exact time, which is how you can get away with a fractional reserve system, right? People are willing to lend you a fraction of their reserve and hopefully earn interest on that. But now we're seeing negative interest rates. So that's when all of a sudden this turns into a money warehousing situation, in which case you better be 100% and fully reserved, because then it doesn't make sense at all. So I think when new people are learning about Bitcoin and these differences of the parallel financial systems between the Bitcoin world and the legacy financial system, I think it won't be all that crazy for people starting to learn about this to question how the legacy financial system operates, and just how it doesn't really make all that much sense, and that these proof of reserve ideas end up being a good thing. And if anything, it's a self-regulating market, right? The free market is acting. Quadriga CX went down, boom, good. You didn't need any kind of regulatory interference for Quadriga to go down. They went down because they were a bad actor in the space, and only the best of the best will continue and remain and service their customers. So, I don't know if you have anything else to add to that, but I just think it's a good thing when we can use proof of keys as a tool to kind of self-regulate as a I don't like to use the term Bitcoin community, but just as the people who are interested in this, we can kind of self-regulate by withdrawing the Bitcoin and using our keys and finding out who the bad actors are in the spaces, and then just liquidating them. Boom, let's just get rid of them and move on.
Yeah, I think it's a good thing. I think the tough thing though is we always forget, since we're on like Twitter and we follow this stuff, is how many people in Bitcoin and crypto in general are not following it because they're just not on like the crypto Twitters of the world. You know what I mean? Like I forget about how many people are in Bitcoin who don't really know any of this just because they aren't on, like, as I said, the crypto Twitters of the world. But obviously Instagram crypto is just brutal.
Right.
Telegram, I don't know about Telegram. Telegram's more just private channels, but still, it's just the point I was thinking of is like it's one of those things where we always like, oh, we heard about this, and you think everyone else has heard about it or something, and they haven't, you know.
No, that's a really good point. I mean, I'm stuck in my small little Bitcoin echo
Our little,
chamber
yeah, exactly.
of,
Well, it's
of
like,
just like,
when we
Bitcoin
talk about little
eating
financial
meat,
things, we're like, oh my god, the world's ending, and everyone else is just going on with their lives.
Yeah,
Like the
nobody
repo,
cares.
we're talking about the repo crisis here in a second, and like 99% of the U.S. population, if not more, could care less or isn't even know what it is,
Right.
and it's just going on.
It really does. It sucks on one hand
We
because
hang out in our echo chambers.
yeah, and that's fine too because I think here's the thing: the echo chamber starts to grow as the people who are inside of the echo chamber get rich from taking the time to understand what's going on from a global macro perspective and these big macro shifts, right? And you and I were talking about this right before the we started recording, Raoul Pal and Real Vision and just these big macro thinkers everybody's kind of starting to wave the flag, sounding the alarm that they can feel that something's not right in the financial system. And you have people like Raul and Dan Tapiero who are becoming more interested in what the financial system looks like after the legacy system kind of extinguishes itself, just from decades and decades of easy money policies and all kinds of just nonsense. They see that shift sooner than everyone else, and they're going to make a ton of money in the meantime, and that's when you get new people joining the echo chamber. Just like you and I probably joined the space in 2017. Somebody knows somebody who got rich trading Bitcoin or shit coins or whatever, and that's number go up, right? Price drives adoption. So
Shout
that's
out
how
Ethereum Tony.
yeah, like he would. Yeah, no, I mean that's a good point. He really hit it out of the park, and I haven't heard too much from him recently.
I haven't seen him post at all. He used to post all the time.
Yeah, but in 2017, everybody knew somebody like that, which was the main reason to get in, right? That's why Coinbase had millions of people signing up on a weekly and monthly basis, and you really need that the people who stuck around throughout the bear market from 2018 all the way now. We're 2 weeks away from 2020, and I can kind of see this still going sideways for 6 months to a year afterwards, just as we're really in the depths and people are starting to get pissed. People are going to make money, and that's when people get interested again. That's when your friends and family or whoever are texting you, asking you questions about whether, and you can tell that we're really. I guess maybe in the summer you and I were talking about, are we in the bear market still? Are we out of it? And when Bitcoin was pumping on its way to 14K, we were like, oh man, we're out of the bear market. Yeah. Shit is changing.
More people are interested for sure, but nowhere
and
near.
And now sentiment shifted again. Right now now everyone's bearish again. Everyone is like,
even though we're still $4,000 above.
Right?
Yeah, we're still basically $4,000 above that December 2018 or the low from basically last year, which is actually a year ago on the dot almost. But I was going to say, I forget it all the time, and I'm sure a lot of people do. At the end of 2017, and even probably, I'd say in the fall into winter, obviously, so many exchanges just stopped taking users. I remember I had buddies who were all hitting me up, and they're like, I can't get on this, can't get on that. And like I gave them advanced, like, for like whatever it was, Bittrex, Bitstamp, Kraken, you name it, Coinbase. They couldn't get on any exchanges and buy shit coins because they were stuck with Coinbase. And Coinbase obviously allowed you access to like Litecoin, Ethereum, and Bitcoin, which isn't fun enough when you can't buy those like lower sat coins. And people were
right.
And I told people like ahead of time to get on, and they're like, nah. And then like 2 months passed by, and like shits went way up, and now they're all like fuck, and trying to get on exchanges. I always forget like how. There's just a system overload for all those exchanges, like where they didn't have enough support people, they didn't have enough server space, etc., to handle just the onslaught of new users. I mean, it was such a weird phenomenon, and obviously it got exacerbated so much more than anything else we've seen in history because of how connected we are. We're all fucking phones, so it's like when Billy fucking makes 10K off the shitcoin he bought this summer, he shows his buddies, and his buddies are like, what the fuck? And it's like, it's November now, and they're like all trying to get on. So.
No, yeah, it's true, and that will inevitably happen again, and it'll be good because we'll have gone through that bull run, that euphoria stage again, and I'll definitely do things a lot differently this time around regarding helping people either hold their own keys, be careful with which exchanges they're using, don't dabble too much in shitcoins if you really can avoid the temptation. Just all that stuff will be different this time around, and I think kind of to transition into the repo crisis, we saw this a couple of articles and other things that came out just within the last week or so. This one in particular was from Zero Hedge. It looks like we've uncovered the issues with the liquidity injection into the repo markets. And it looks like starting from pretty much now today until the middle of January, the Fed's expecting to pump $365 billion worth of liquidity into the market. And just so we're clear, that's also not QE, apparently, which
not,
is just...
I don't understand this whole not
joke.
QE. It doesn't make any sense to me, not QE. What is QE then?
Right. I mean, this is what happens when you're allowed to change definitions of things, and this is something
this is why CPI is at 2% and not 10%.
Right. So, it was interesting reading this because it looks like the cause of the liquidity crunch could have been driven by JP Morgan shifting a massive cash position that they were holding into long-term bonds. So that essentially dried up liquidity and almost had the market start to freeze up, right? Which is why the Fed was called in as the backstop to inject liquidity into the market. And I find that interesting because, as usual, as credit is withheld from the market, all of a sudden you start to have issues, right? So there was contractionary monetary policy, I guess starting in 2018 into 2019, the Fed was starting to unwind the balance sheet a little bit. And then all of a sudden it's like, wait, we have liquidity issues here. The market's about to freeze up if we don't inject some liquidity into there. And that's when you have these boom bust cycles. And if you're ever interested in reading about the Austrian theory of the business cycle, this is what Mises and Rothbard talked about, was the expansion and contraction of the monetary supply is what causes the boom bust cycle. And they're the only it's the only economic thought that can realistically explain the causes of the boom bust cycle. The Keynesians can't explain it. The Chicago School monetarists can't explain it. The socialists certainly can't explain it. And funnily enough, the Austrian view, free markets, is the only way to properly explain these business cycles. So again, not a surprise. And the Bank of International Settlements has finally identified the institutions that were in need of this liquidity. And it turns out, I know you and I were speculating that, hey, maybe it's Deutsche Bank. Turns out it was a bunch of hedge funds that are highly levered who needed additional liquidity to, I guess, not be called from their levered positions, right? And the BIS had also said that this reminds them of the long-term capital management, which was a hedge fund that was founded by, I'm doing air quotes here, academics in the 90s that blew up in the late 90s. And, some of the apparently smartest people and economic thinkers on the planet basically destroyed themselves very, very quickly in the 90s.
And it correlates, I don't mean to kind of cut into this, it correlates completely with the, because I've read about this before, it correlates 100% with what happened in 98 when the equity market kind of fell backwards and people were worried about the because that's when the IPO boom was going, the tech bubble was going crazy. Mm-hmm. And if you look what happened, so you had that Russian, I think in August it was late 97 was the Asian financial crisis, which doesn't look like it hurt as much as it did. I mean, there's obviously, that's a big drop there. That wick down there's pretty deep, obviously recovered. But you had the Russian issues in the summer of 98, and then you had on top of that, come August, you had, and in September, that bottom was the long-term capital management crisis. And from what I've heard was basically the whole financial system was, pardon my language, but it was fucked. And what happened was a bunch of people on Wall Street got together because they knew that if LTCM went under completely and wasn't bailed out, that all their stocks would get hammered heavily because they all had derivatives exposure to them. And so they were bailed out for like $3.6 billion by 14 different banks. So, and then the market kept trudging on.
Yep, and then all of a sudden it was 2001, and that kind of was that. That was, I guess you can call it 2.5 years of not so fun times. I was kind of too young to remember how shitty it was. I guess I was going into high school in 2004-ish time frame, not to dox myself, but that was when things were just starting to wrap up. But it blows my mind that history doesn't always repeat itself, but it rhymes, right? So we've seen these kinds of things happen over and over and over again, but nobody takes it that seriously, and they don't start taking it seriously until it's over, or we're in mid recession, or whatever the case may be. And I think one of the reasons that people don't bring it up as much is because there's no financial incentive to bring it up. You start bringing things like that up to coworkers, family, and friends, or maybe you're a pundit on CNBC and you're saying like, hey, I feel like something's not right here. I mean, that's it. You could lose your job. No one's going to take you seriously. So like, it doesn't pay well to tell the truth. And that's kind of the situation that we've gotten ourselves into these days, especially when it comes to the financial markets. And it's just not good, because a lot of people are being led by the nose thinking things are fine when it really just doesn't seem that way.
It's like we always talk about conspiracy theories and stuff like that. Not as much on this podcast, but we do talk about a lot off. And it's like, it's no longer a conspiracy theory what the Fed's mandate is.
Right.
It's not employment. It's not the inflation. It's they have to keep interest rates low because of the insurmountable debt that the U.S. federal government has taken on, corporations and personal. They can't, and then on top of that, they can't let the stock market go down. If the stock market got halved right now, if we had to, instead of a 3,200 or 3,150, whatever the S&P is right now, we got 1,500 S&P, you would have a whole lot of people, baby boomers specifically, who would be just wrecked and have to go back into labor force, and it would throw everything off. And then you got to remember all these people who are 60, 70, they can't get, today's workforce is so much different than it was 20 years ago. Everyone's on their smartphones, using different CRM systems like Salesforce, you name it, depends on what your job is, but it's all tied into using technology, whether it's on email or on the internet, or having a smartphone and using a certain app at your business. And that would be a huge, huge, huge issue, because the older people, the older generation, they don't want to learn this stuff. They don't. It's just a reality. And then trying to learn it is like so painful. If you've worked with people who are older and trying to get them to learn tech, it's like painful. And obviously, I'm young, and it's like I'm not like a tech expert by any means, but I can usually figure most things out.
Yeah, no, that's I guess that's a different topic for a different day, but it's a good point to mention that change happens no matter what, and you need to be able to adapt to that. And I used to have a manager who always told me to stay relevant, and what he meant by that was you need to have a certain set of skills in order to succeed or be successful, and that set of skills is not always the same. And he was a boomer, but the guy was really good at Excel and really good at building tools that we needed. I did a lot of financial analysis, and he taught me a lot. And now that I'm moving up in my career, I look at my peers and my superiors, and they're just really not as technically sound as I thought they would be. And a lot of these people are very, very intelligent, and I'm almost surprised that they don't have the same level of expertise. And my fear is that some of the generations below us lost some of the skill sets that are necessary in order to be successful. And my guess is that those skills moving into the future will be different and much more centered around being able to talk the language of the computer. In other words, knowing the basics of a little bit of computer programming, really knowing Excel inside and out. Not so much Word and PowerPoint anymore, but just really the basics. And that'll just be your baseline skill set, and that's okay, and that's nothing to be afraid of. Because believe me, I'm not the smartest person in the world, but I got good at Excel from watching YouTube videos, trying to, reverse engineer other, templates and shit that I've seen. Like, it's really not all that complicated stuff. And the best part is that you look like a genius in front of people who can't convert a Word doc to a PDF. So,
Dude, I can't tell you how many times when people are like that, that's when you're like, oh my, like, because I haven't worked in that many workforces, but when you're dealing with like older people and like the workforce, and it's like simple things like what you just said, Word doc to PDF or vice versa. Holy shit. It's like, and again, it's just like a simple Google search.
Yeah, none of this is is complicated. Just learn how to use a computer and Google stuff and watch, I'd say with 100 hours of YouTube videos, you could learn how to use Excel. You could learn very basics of programming. You can learn how to use Photoshop and video editing software. And like, those are now like the new basic skills that you could run your own business from your laptop in Bali, and like, you're good. It's really not super complicated. I don't know. I guess that's a little off topic, but that's
why we do a podcast. This isn't TV.
Stems back to the easy money policies, and that people have gotten away with not learning skills and leveling up their skills because of these easy money kind of policies. And I know that might sound like it doesn't make sense intuitively, but when you really step back and think about it, that is the main driver of some of these issues. And, the boomers haven't had to learn too many technical skills because they didn't have to. They made a shitload of money pushing papers around, and while being very intelligent and working very hard, you could put your money in stocks, bonds, and real estate, and you're retiring a millionaire. And it wasn't all that difficult. Your education was a couple $1,000 for like all 4 years and all this. Like, it was really relatively pretty easy for you to become a millionaire. For the millennials, a little bit more complicated for sure.
And it vastly changed from the boomer generation. Now Gen X obviously had a little more paying, because it wasn't until like late, I want to say 78 or 77, when the whole system for student loans became free money. Because before it was just low income and people in poverty could apply for federal student loans, and then after 78, basically everyone could do it. And so it was, here's free money, and the schools were like, oh wait, we can incrementally increase every year X amount of percent, whether it's books, room and board, how much it costs per credit. And that's why it's become so crazy. Like, and that's why when you hear boomers talk, oh, I paid my way through college. Yeah, you paid your way through college because college didn't cost a holy shit ton before. And then when you look at universities nowadays versus you look at major universities in the United States in 1975 or 74 versus a major university in 2019, and you look at all the largesse around, and whether you're talking giant facilities, and I could go on for hours about whether you're talking all the cafeterias, the rec facilities, climbing walls, basketball courts, you name it. And I'm not having anything against this. I'm just saying all the excess stuff, all the staff they have to hire. There's so much more at universities in 2019 than there was in 1975, and all these additional costs that add on to the top. And that's why you have this.
Yeah, definitely. And, I think this is a great way to transition into the student loan bubble. But before we do that, I just wanted to ask you, when we think about the repo crisis and just the Fed and the Bank of International Settlements being involved in injecting liquidity into the marketplace to prevent a freeze up, how does fiat play a role in all of this, and why, when you step back and think about it, does sound money fix this and allow for this kind of thing to not happen?
So the fiat money role is, and as we talked before, it's, you don't have a good idea of what your money is actually worth. Like, we really don't know what a dollar is. And as we talked about before, like the suppression of gold, silver, other metals, and on a fiat standard because of the paper markets. because people can buy large paper positions without having to hold the actual physical silver, gold, etc. And on the fiat side of things, when things aren't going so well, we can print a little more money, or we need to fund this war, we need to fund this healthcare program, or we need to fund these benefit programs. I hate to break it to everyone, and I don't, as I say, I don't like to get into politics on this because this is not the point of this podcast. But obviously, a majority of I would say left policies and left-leaning democratic policies in the U.S. are around this idea that we can just print money into oblivion, and that Andrew Yang is running on, we're going to give everyone $1,000 a month or whatever it is. So you're going to give away $12,000 a year to 100 million people or whatever that number is going to be. It's nonsense. It's a giant joke. Or it was like when fucking Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was trying to push this $94 trillion Green New Deal. Where are you going to get that money? It's not even a fathomable number. It's such a pie in the sky number. Like, a trillion is a million squared. So I just, it's like I'm like so sick and tired of seeing these unrealistic things, and it's because people don't understand how the money supply worked. I think if everyone in the U.S., especially kids going through school right now, were forced to learn about how the Federal Reserve System works, how money works, how interest rates work, etc., people will be like, oh, we can't do that. We don't want to do that. We shouldn't do that. Wait, no, don't do that. We don't want Weimar Republic. We don't want Zimbabwe. We don't want Venezuela. But that's what's happening right now. It's like you and I discussed the other not so long ago, last week. I hadn't got a haircut at the place back home where I'm from, and it went from $16 to $18. And I was looking at it because I saw the guy ahead of me go, and I saw him give a pretty nice tip. But I was like, I knew something was a little different because it was around Christmas time, and I was like, oh, that makes sense. I looked up, and it was adult haircut, $18, and so it's and I mentioned to you, it's a 12.75% increase or whatever it was, or 12.5, whatever it was, over 1 year. And obviously when you compound that, it becomes a big deal. Does that mean, next year, Christmas 2020, the haircut's gonna be $20 or $21? I don't know. And as you were saying, yours jumped from 30 to 35.
Yep.
And it's a major increase. And, we're seeing all these slight, the inflation's poking us everywhere. It's whether you're at the grocery store, you see it, but then the CPI number, we've only, inflated everything by, CPI is under 2% this year. It's bullshit. It's I'm so sick and tired of it. And I say it because it's true. The Fed just lying about the CPI numbers, because prior to 1980, that's when the major inflation happened. So when the U.S. delinked from gold in 71, there was huge stagflation in the late 70s, and prices jumped and everything. I remember reading someone's tweet how he was frustrated as a little kid because the price of a candy bar went from 10 cents to 25 cents or something like that, which it's huge, 150% increase, overnight. And think about probably the price of a can of Coca-Cola or a bottle of Coca-Cola then went from probably 10 cents to 20 cents or something. And that's huge. That'd be if you were going out and buying a water bottle, it going from $1 to $2, instead
right.
And we don't see it, but as I said, I just had a 12.5% increase over 1 year. That's insane. But that matches the actual, CPI we're getting right now, because the original calculation, if you take the original calculation since 1980, we've been fluctuating between 6 to 13% for the better part of almost 40 years.
Yeah, it's a lot. The inflation's a lot more, and I think this is a good way to transition into the student loan bubble. And from an education standpoint, you don't learn the basics and the fundamentals of what money is, how it works, what the interest rate actually is, and how it has been manipulated by a central party, right? And I was just watching a Gary Vee video where he was being interviewed by somebody, and he was just ripping apart the school system, which I'm certainly not a fan of the school system.
I think we're both in the same boat there.
And it's cool to watch Gary talk about it, because Gary's at the point where he's made fuck you money, and he doesn't say anything too radical or that he's going to be kicked off of social media or anything like that. But he does a good job of I mean, he laid it right out there. He's like, kids don't learn about money. They don't learn about finance. They don't learn how to manage their budget. They don't know how to save into the future. They don't know how to do their taxes. They don't know what money is from a fundamental standpoint. And when I sit and look back at my, like a, you know, a decade and a half, almost 2 decades of education, I didn't learn anything but facts that are irrelevant when it comes to the real world. And that's a real shame because it costs a lot of money to educate every single person in this country. A lot, and you have to pay for that. It's not voluntary, right? You and I have to pay for that.
Yeah,
for
we pay for taxes
Right.
for benefit programs that are going to go run out of funding.
Right. It's a shame that if it were, I could see someone making the argument to pay your taxes if it was great, like the education was awesome and everybody came out learning a profitable skill and all this stuff, and it's really not the case. So while I more align with the taxation is theft argument, I can't even think of who is pro taxation who can look me in the eye with a straight face and say, oh no, but it's a fantastic system. Like, as expensive as it is, all the taxes that we pay, it's just a really good system, and everybody's coming out, on top, and it was totally worth educating all these people that way. I mean, you can't say that with a straight face, and I think that's exactly why we have such a large student loan bubble. The government allowed for,
at least now,
right? So there was an article covering this guy Mike Calhoun, who's been sounding the alarm on the student debt bubble, and surprisingly enough, he was doing the same exact thing in 2006 through 2008 and was warning about the reckless subprime loans. And student loans have grown from 300 million to 1.6 trillion in the last 15 years, it's a truly unbelievable number. And the default levels are finally starting to creep up, and they are approaching the levels of the same levels during the subprime mortgage crisis. And I wanted to read a few stats here, and it was default rates by race, which is kind of an interesting way to put it. And I kind of want to toss the race part out for a second, but just
Racism.
go over some of the, yeah, I want to go over some of these default rates because I do find it interesting. So, for the Black or African Americans, the total average amount borrowed is around $55,000 per person taking out a loan. Their default rate has gone up to 20%. Latinos, 29,000 amount borrowed, 8.6% default rate. Whites, 26,000, a 4% default rate. And then Asians, around 30,000 and 1.4% default rate. Those default rates are pretty high and a little concerning, not for any race in particular, but just the amount of people who are getting closer to default. And that does have some issues. And someone tried to push back on these figures and say, well, you know what? The amount of borrowing keeps decreasing year over year, and a third of the borrowers have less than $10,000 in loans. So, show me where the crisis is. Are we even in a crisis? And the problem with that is that as the default rates continue to increase, those people suffer from getting their credit scores kind of wrecked in that process. And then the boomers who are looking to unload their homes in the next decade, they're not going to have anybody to sell to because these people had their credits destroyed from the student loan debt and defaulting on these loans. Even though you can't default, the default rates are increasing where they're just not paying the loan at all. Everyone who got a degree that is not profitable and has literally no payback period is once their loans paid for and defaulted on and taken care of, and they don't care about the inflation that comes along with that. But they're not going to be able to buy boomers bags who want to move on and dump their homes. And I think the ripple effect of the student loan bubble, which, to be very clear, was caused by easy money policies, will have a ripple effect that isn't talked as much about in this article, but I think that's where things can really start to get out of control. But what do you think?
I was going to make a point on this. Like, I feel like I've talked to some kids my age who have student loan debt, a lot of them are kind of in this boat, like, well, and again, we've seen this with the election cycle with the Democrats, and I just because that's what their policies are running on. We're gonna relieve everyone of student loan debt. Well, it's like, who's gonna cover the $1.64 trillion that's owed to bondholders, and people don't even think about that. Like, we're just gonna make it free for everyone, or right. And you can't just say, hey, we're gonna cover this 10% of the loans over here because they're this. Because then the other people are like, well, fuck that, I'm not paying. And I've seen kids my age who are just like, well, I'm not going to pay because they think it's sooner or later it's not going to matter. And I kind of agree with them, because I think what you're going to continue to see is a tidal wave of people, younger people, particularly probably millennials, mainly, people in their 20s and 30s who are just like, fuck it, it's too much, I'm not paying. And I think as that number increases, it's kind of like that S curve we talk about with adoption, except the adoption rate will be people not paying their loans. And what are you going to do? You're going to you can wreck everyone's credit score, but at some point someone's got to pay. So you can't. Are you going to put guns to people's heads to make them pay for their loans? I don't know. It's a pretty shitty situation we've dug ourselves into here. And this guy Mike Calhoun. And I don't know if you already said this statistic, but basically in 15 years, we have went from 2006 to 2019, we have went from $300 billion in student loan debt to $1.6 trillion, which is ridiculous. And it's not like we're giving people the people going to college are coming out and they're coming out with $50,000 in student loan debt and they're going to get a job that pays them $100K a year. It's not that. It's they're getting $100K in student loan debt. And then they're coming out and they're finding, oh, wait, I'm going to get a job that pays $40K a year. And then on top of that, after expenses, they might have $10,000 left over, and that's all going to go to student loan debt. And that's the big issue we're facing right now, is that people, right. There's not enough for the people. They're getting themselves into debt for, a job or whatever they're looking for that's not going to pay enough. And again, we've talked this before, we just need a complete repricing of everything. And here again, it just all ties back to the money. You have a currency, U.S. dollar, euro, Canadian dollar, etc., that is completely mispriced every asset. Whether right. you're talking about precious metals, whether you're talking about Bitcoin and crypto, whether you're talking about oil, whether you're talking about the tuition you pay for schools, and the equity markets and the bond prices, and it's just. It is taken everything is so mispriced, we don't know, and we need a reset. We need to, a reversion to mean is going to be so painful, and that is what I was saying earlier. Basically, the Federal Reserve, that's their only mandate right now, is prevent that reversion to mean. They know it's coming, and it's like a joke, because it's like, okay, so it doesn't happen in 2019, didn't happen in 2018. Okay, so what's better of it happening in 2020 or 2021? I don't know, but that. I was reading an article by Michael Krieger, and I agree wholeheartedly. It's a 2020 to 2025 period. It's going to be pretty bleak, I imagine. And I think we're seeing in geopolitics, we've seen the huge push for nationalism. The whole idea of globalism has just been shattered in the last 3 years. Mainly, obviously, the big start of it was Donald Trump's election, but we've seen a huge shattering of this whole global narrative. And we're seeing a lot of people kind of pushing back on this, one world government or whatever you want to call it. And I think, again, like things like the United Nations, are they really useful? Will we see? And I'm just getting a little off in politics because I'm reading about what led up to World War II right now, because the League of Nations was this whole thing that basically failed. League of Nations wasn't dissolved until 1945, but obviously 1939, when Germany invaded Poland and World War II really began, it was useless. But it really was useless prior to that in 1935, when Italy attacked Abyssinia, which was a colony or a country or nation state basically in Africa, and no one did anything about it. The League of Nations didn't do anything about it. So, and then even prior to that, the League of Nations failed to do anything when Japan invaded Manchuria, which is northern China. And I know this is me being just a history nerd ranting about it, but we have all these giant, United Nations is one of them. NATO's another one. Will NATO be relevant? Because we see the U.S. with Donald Trump kind of pushing back against NATO, because the U.S. pours so much money abroad into military assets and bases and whatever. It's insane. And like as I've said before in other podcasts, the U.S. may outspend the top 10 countries, but the reason that's happening for military budget is because we have 800 plus military bases worldwide that cost money, and we've been at war for 18 years, which isn't obviously what's the correct word? Financially smart. I don't know.
Right. It's a cost driver of both lives and inflation and money.
Yeah. There's no way around it, and I think, and the insanity to me is like, and I don't mean to touch about politics here, but when Donald Trump said, "Oh, we're pulling out of Syria," and then you see the left and the right war hawks come together on news and they're like, "We can't do that, the Kurds," and it's like, holy shit, these people don't care about anything. We're going through this whole impeachment thing, and there's so many bigger things that the U.S. is facing. Like I always like to talk about like our budgets, and I was talking about this with my professor in jiu-jitsu. We were talking about how it's nonsense right now. There's the federal budget that still needs to be passed for 2020, and then on top of that we have all this, the deficit is going to $1 trillion each year, and then the debt is at $23 trillion. There's so many issues we face as a country, and this goes for a lot of countries too, that we're not dealing with. And you can only kick the can down, and that's the problem with politics right now, is you can only kick the can down the road so long. And obviously over the last decade, thankfully, we're seeing like people like us starting podcasts and having long-form talks about things that you don't get, because on TV they get 1 minute to summarize a point. Or the same thing with like when you see the Democratic national debate, or you go back to the Republican national debate, you give candidates 2 minutes to talk about foreign policy. How the fuck are you supposed to talk about foreign policy in 2 minutes? Or how are you supposed to solve a budget in 1 minute talk? No, it should be discussed over long periods of form talk, and it's just getting absurd. And I think we're seeing the legacy system, whether you talk about legacy news, legacy government being challenged. The old world, the post-World War II world is collapsing right now. That's what's happening.
Yeah, and I think you really nailed it in the beginning there when you talked about just how everything is so mispriced. And that gets back to, Austrian economics and the fact that these things don't work if you do not have a free market giving you price signals of what things actually are worth in the market, and that subjective value. How do people value education? What is the true cost of learning a skill or being educated? And I find it very interesting that the cost to learn a skill that, let's call it a trade, is much less than the cost to earn, let's call it more of a liberal arts education. And I think the mispricing between the two is drastic, but also very telling. So if you want to learn to become a welder at a trade school or Lincoln Tech or something, let's say it costs $10,000 for your whole curriculum for however many years it takes. But if you want to get a degree in political science or something else that is more fluffy than, say, an actual skill that you can go and perform and get compensated for, it is probably 10x more expensive than that, because you have the ability to take loans at such a low interest rate that it pushes the price of that education up so much. And just as you said, it's mispriced. You cannot, when interest rates are manipulated, you do not have a good price signal or mechanism to figure out the subjective value of anything in the marketplace. And it's just been like that for too long, and it's starting to unravel at the seams globally, not just, and you and I should be thankful we live in the United States. It's not like we've had 52 weeks of riots every weekend in every major metropolitan area across the country. It just hasn't been that way because the inflation's been exported to other countries, and it's just now starting to work its way back into our system here domestically. And it just makes things interesting. And, I try not to get triggered with too much of the political stuff as much anymore. And it did used to trigger me, but now that I've kind of jump down the Bitcoin rabbit hole and just in Austrian economics perspective of how things have worked out, these things really don't last forever. And it does it does end up working its way out. It's more just what do you need to do in the meantime to survive that? How do you protect your assets and the capital that you've accumulated over that time? And how do you protect you and your family? That's the part that is scary, but it's also the part that's exciting, because if you're taking a step back and looking at everything holistically, you can do what you need to do to make it through. And it's so obvious to me now how fiat money has just really manipulated just the mispricing of everything on a global scale this time around. And everyone just needs to be aware of that.
You want to know how a highly levered reality TV star becomes president? Fiat money.
Yeah, I mean, that's true too. That's a really good point. It is unbelievable, because I like don't really think about it that way anymore. It's been what, 3 or 4 years.
It's been over 3
years.
My
life hasn't really changed all that much. It just is what it is. It doesn't make a difference.
Believe it or not, the
anymore,
president of the United States does not affect your life, and that was the craziest thing. I just, when you said triggered earlier, I had to find this little meme, that woman's face. But it blows my mind that people like. Again, this is where people are so misled because they don't do their own research. They listen to what they're told, and oh my God, Donald Trump got elected. My whole life's over. No, it's not. Donald Trump can barely move the needle. If you haven't been paying attention to anything in Washington D.C., he's barely moved the needle,
right.
For good or bad. And the reality is, the people that have an effect on your life are the people that you don't hear about in the media. And obviously, if you watch CNBC, you hear about Jay Powell, but a lot of people don't know about the Federal Reserve, people like Neil Kashari or other Federal Reserve people. And the same thing goes for, who's at the IMF or who's at, the ECB. Like Mario Draghi just left, and Christine Lagarde just left her presidential position to go take over the ECB. Those are the people that really affect your life.
Exactly. I think that's a good point.
But you don't hear about them because mainstream media's got you sidetracked with stupid politics like the impeachment process, which is a complete sham, because I don't know what these people think. Like, and I don't mean to talk politics, but like, okay, so you impeach Trump, but now you get President Pence. Nothing changes.
Right.
It's like,
right.
It blows my mind. But then again, it's the media just distorts everything right now, and it's like, instead of focusing on real issues our country faces, like an 18-year war that cost $1 trillion, and obviously thousands of American soldiers' lives and more casualties, and then obviously the PTSD side of it, that's not getting any coverage. I just sent you that meme earlier. It's not getting any coverage.
Right.
It wouldn't.
No, I think
the military-industrial complex does not want CNN, MSNBC, Fox talking about that. No, do not talk about that.
Right. And no, I mean, just to tie it all back, because as as touchy as a subject that is, it's important to remember that any of that, regardless of how you think about it, it's not possible, or very, very, very limited under a sound money standard. All of these things are only possible under a fiat monetary system with, the central banking, where you can have so many decades of just malinvestment and things that are really reaping and pillaging individual liberties and freedoms. And it's why everyone is so stressed out and why it makes everything so difficult. And it's also why I'm just so bullish on, Bitcoin and sound money, because you need a technical solution to this problem. If you think we're gonna vote harder and vote our way out of it, you're very confused about how democracy works and how it historically has never worked and typically always led to socialism anyway. You need technical solutions to these problems. You need sound money. That's why gold and silver were such good monies, because they were a check on the financial system. You could not extend credit beyond a certain amount until people realized that that was not such a good idea. So that's the one thing that does give me hope about all of this, is that things that are false don't last forever, and it's important now that ever. I mean, just the fact that you and I have a podcast about this particular topic in general shows that people are starting to come to their senses about this.
Yeah, and as we talked about before, I think the last podcast, the term fiat has just exponentially exploded in the last year or two. We hear it so much more. Actually, speaking of which, I'm just going to, my internet doesn't decide to kaput, which it apparently is. Look up fiat on Google Ads. Is it Trends?
Oh yeah. You could check Google Trends to see what fiat looks like. It's funny because the term fiat is just the gold bugs are probably shocked that all of the Bitcoiners and crypto people have taken a liking to the term.
I want Brazil. Why is it giving worldwide? By the way, you might have cut out. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, cool. You know what? That's worldwide. Let's go US, because that might be a better represent. Wow, look at that. I'm really surprised by that.
Me too. I thought that
I would expect a lot more.
Yeah, you can see that run up in 2008 into 2009 timeframe, and then a jump again in 2011, 2012.
2011.
I am a little surprised.
That would make sense because of the gold and silver hitting peak prices, and probably people like Skiff at the time are probably going fucking nuts, being like it was because think about it, we just went through the financial crisis. The U.S. and other central banks started easing, interest rates were zero, and here they are thinking it was the end of the world, and they were right in the sense that it was, but central banks managed to prop everything up and keep it going, and that would make sense why we see at the top of the gold peak we see fiat, because people are probably like, fiat's worthless, when you see $2,000 gold. But I'm shocked that we don't see a much larger. I think my voice just cracked there too, like I'm a little girl. Like I'm shocked we don't see much of a bump even around the crypto time. I mean, you see a little bit in July 2018, but then just dump. I'm very surprised by that chart.
Me too. But I guess I could flip that around and say it's bullish to me, because if nobody's talking about it, that means you and I are both way earlier than we think.
We're so early.
We're so fucking early. So I'll turn it around and make it bullish, because if you and I are talking about it, I like it. Yeah, look at that. You can tell we're really in the depths of the bear market again, and you can see the little blip in the summertime when Bitcoin was.
If you match this to price, it's
like exact. It's exact.
Like, and it's fucking. I'll pull up the Bitcoin chart. It's literally exactly the Bitcoin chart.
Yeah, it's
100% the Bitcoin chart. There's the June peak. Well, there's the June peak.
Yep. No, it really is. It really is. But good. That means we're early and nobody else is paying attention. So, take that time to enjoy the cheap sats and all the other.
Enjoy being early.
Yeah, enjoy being early. I think that's a good way to wrap it up. So this was episode 61 of the Beef and Bitcoin podcast. Make sure to take a look at proofofkeys.com. Get comfortable using Bitcoin, withdrawing your Bitcoin from the exchange. Do not leave your coins on there. It's right around the corner, January 3rd. Keep that in mind, and stay aware, everybody, and make sure you're stacking sats.
My 2 cents: do your due diligence, do your research, always ask questions, and be curious. Peace.
Good lesson. Peace.